and welcome to the current episode of Unboxing Russia. My name is Pradnya, and together with Ekaterina here, we are going to talk about everything about German elections today for a change, a little bit about India, and quite a lot about Russia. So, welcome.
Welcome, and we are very happy that amidst the myriad things that are happening, we found time to talk to each other and to address our highly esteemed audience. So, as I said, a lot of things have been happening since last we met, and we are going to address them from the Russian perspective and from the Indian perspective. We are going to talk about the results of the recent German parliamentary elections because we cannot not talk about German elections, and we'll try to say how this process and the results thereof look from the Russian eyes, as seen through the eyes of a Russian political scientist, and as seen through the eyes of an Indian, how would I call you, social philosopher?
Someone who likes to observe politics, because I'm not a political scientist by training.
No, you're not. You do cultural studies.
Cultural, media, and political science. So it's a little bit of everything.
Very good, very good. And then we'll try to talk about other things that have been happening to the world at large, including the bromance 2.0 of the Russian and American leadership, and of how people try to make sense of the rather chaotic events of the past weeks and months, and sometimes even years. They say everyone has their own pet conspiracy theories, so we are going to talk about the conspiratorial way of thinking and perhaps share some of our favorites as well. So, coming back to Germany, from which blessed country we are doing this talk. For a Russian observer, the first thing that strikes the eye is, of course, I can call it surprising because I knew it was there, but when you see it in motion, it is even more surprising how de jure similar is the German political system and the German electoral process to the Russian one, and in terms of substance, how very different. The juridical similarity is easy to explain. Russian Empire has been borrowing from Germany before there was Germany to borrow from. The Romanovs, our ruling family, our royal family, were more and more German as time went by, and since the times of Nicholas I, a Russian legal code has been very much copied from the Prussian models. And the tradition continued well into Soviet and even post-Soviet times. This is partially explained not just by royal family affinities or sympathies, but by the fact that we both belong to the continental legal school, unlike the Anglo-Saxon, the Anglo-American legal school, which is based on precedent. The continental one is based on codification. So we all have a lot of laws because everything needs to be legalized, not by means of judicial precedent, but by means of an actual law, a federal law in case of Russia, well, a federal law in case of today's Germany, and laws are collected into codes. Electoral system in post-Soviet Russia has very much been based on the German model. We also have a two-chamber parliament, the upper chamber representing the regions and the lower chamber representing the parties. And in this lower chamber, Bundestag in case of Germany and State Duma in Russia, we have a kind of dual composition. So we have one half of this chamber elected by party lists and another half elected by constituencies. Regional, local constituencies.
So people, when they cast a vote, they cast two votes?
Yes, we have two ballots.
One is for the party? And yes. One is for a direct mandate for your constituency.
And also, like in Germany, those direct mandates go to people who represent the parties. So you can't you can be a so-called self-supported candidate, but this is rare and the system is intentionally complicated. So the idea is that we need strong parties, and these parties will then support their own candidates. unlike in Russia, in Germany, you have a more people's parliament in the sense that you just have more
It's
members
bigger
of
than the
parliament.
Indian parliament.
Yes. And it's much bigger than Russian parliament. So you have 600 plus members of parliament, MPs, in the German Bundestag, while in the whole of Russia, which is a country, well, and here's the rub, it's a country officially supposed to have 142 million people, but the figure is disputed by some demographers, but we will not go into that. So in Russia, however many people inhabit it, we have 450 MPs in the lower chamber. And in India...
1.4 billion people, 540 members of parliament.
So I know it's not a very popular opinion these days, but I've always been for bigger parliaments. First, because people need to be represented, and if you have a large country, then you can't possibly have equal and adequate representation if you have those small parliaments. It's worse in case, again, if we go back to Russia, it's worse in case, for example, of a city like Moscow, which is 12 to 15 million people, and the city parliament used to have 35 members. Now it's 45, which is ridiculous. 12 million is as good as a European country, and they have this very, very small city parliament. And the smaller your parliament, the easier it is to control, either by an executive or by, well, big businesses.
But coming back to the elections.
Yes. Coming back to the elections, the similarities have been listed. The differences are even more striking. I know that many people have their different worries and troubles as far as the electoral results are concerned, but again, to a Russian political scientist, it looks like a fairy tale. So many parties that you have, free exchange of ideas, limited influence of the executive. And we also have a 5% parliamentary barrier, so you need to.
For whoever who doesn't know what that means, if a party fails to get a 5% stake in terms of the votes, they cannot enter the parliament, even if they have gotten some votes, but which are unfortunately under 5%. So they fall out. And in Germany this time it was two parties, but we'll come to that.
We used to have a 7% barrier. Well, first 5%, then during the Putin stability years, they raised it to 7%, and then back again to 5%. Personally, I think that 3.5 would be better for a barrier in Russian case, because we need more representation. We need a wider plethora of parties in the parliament, and we definitely need electoral legislation like the German one that prevents the establishment of a stable one-party majority.
But this time I can say that I'm particularly glad that we have the barrier at 5% and not at 3.5, because had the barrier been at 3.5% for the Germans, two very small parties would have entered the parliament, which would have made building a coalition very challenging, and it would have been a lot of slippery slopes for the coalition, which could have happened. And that's not a scenario that would have made things easier. Not that they're particularly easy right now.
Well,
but
the difficulties of creating a coalition are attacks on the political class, but the possibility of emerging one-party majority is a danger for the people in general. This is what we have. Again, in my Russian eyes, nothing can be worse than a stable majority of one party that doesn't need anyone else to pass any sort of decision whatsoever. A constitutional majority in the hands of one party is a nightmare, and this is what we are living through. But even a so-called simple majority is already bad enough. Electoral legislation should enforce coalition building, not power concentration.
I get what you're saying, but I'm going to address that in a bit when we talk about percentages, about the voting patterns and everything that happened in the German elections.
So, how do German elections and their outcome look to you? And by the way, one more kudo to the German electoral system. I know that the running of electoral process is not always smooth, but here the voters' turnout
This time, I was about to start with that. So this was a historical election in many ways, and particularly so because 82.5% of voter participation, which is historical because I think this was the first time after the after the reunification happened. That was a time when we had a very good voter turnout, and now after so many years, 82.5% people actually turned up. The downside of that, or a part of it, is the higher voter turnout, especially in the eastern part of Germany, benefited the Alternative for Germany, which is a right-wing party. But to get the basics out of our way, so the Christian Democrats currently are at 28.60, which is about 208 seats in the parliament. The SPD, which is the Social Democrats, are at 16.4%. That's about 120 seats. The outgoing coalition, which is the Greens, the SPD, and the FDP, were severely punished in this election. So they lost a lot of mandate. So the Greens came out at only about 11.6%, which is 85 seats. The FDP did not cross the 5% barrier. The Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, which is a shoot off of the left party, which created a lot of headlines, but failed now to make it into the parliament.
I think they're going to sue.
They're going to challenge the electoral result, but they don't stand a good chance of even
because they are just on the threshold.
So they are trying to also agree that a lot of postal ballots, which did not make it till the deadline, because the elections were snap elections, so the authorities did not have enough time to prepare for the elections, which meant that the postal ballot was sent out too late, which meant that it did not make it back on time, and so on and so forth. So they are trying to challenge the election result, but in the eyes of a lot of experts, they don't stand a real chance of the elections being contested. So we are at that point. But what is surprising is that the AfD, which is the right wing, and the left, which was a surprise winner, 8.8%, which makes about 64 seats, and most of them coming in from Berlin. So these two are two parties on the end of the spectrum, opposite ends of the spectrum, to be fair. And amongst themselves, they have about 29% of votes. And this is quite interesting from the eyes of a political scientist or a watcher. It's concerning as a citizen because, and to be fair, I think the left party they spoke to a lot of young voters because they were addressing issues of affordable rent, affordable healthcare, education, and so on and so forth. So things that actually matter to young people. The AfD, I don't want to say to be fair, but to hand it to them, and in this one degree, they actually spoke to the young people in which they tried to address issues around unemployment, around issues around concerns of migration. And of course, then they took something which was a reality and then they put their spin on it, and then it became a very different kind of thing at the end. But amongst themselves, they have about 30% of the vote. So what is concerning to me in the aftermath of the election is similar to what happened after the American elections the last time around, when Joe Biden was elected as the president. And there was this sense of relief around the world saying that, dodged a bullet, it was not Trump. Thank God it's Biden. And it's not particularly because Biden was good. It was because it was not Trump.
And then 4 years later?
Exactly. So similarly, right now the sentiment here is it's not going to be the CDU making a coalition with the Greens, with the AfD. And that's what I meant earlier. Had the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht made it into the parliament, or even the FDP, there would have been a real chance of the CDU having to consider the possibility of entering into a coalition, because the coalition with the SPD and the Greens would not have helped them get enough seats for a majority in the parliament. So it's sort of a blessing in disguise. However sad it is that right now the constitution of the parliament, it is the way it looks, which will make now probably in 99.9% scenario is that the CDU will build a coalition with the SPD, which is the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats, and build a government. what is concerning and what people are not talking about enough here right now is you have a parliamentary majority of 21% for the AFD. So that's not a small amount of people. It's a lot of people. And they are going to make sure that they are going to create hurdles in parliamentary procedure. They are going to create hurdles in passing bills. They are not going to make it easy for the coalition government to deliver on some promises, or sometimes even too tall promises that they have made to the electorate. And in the next election cycle, they can go back to the voters saying, see, a lot of talk, no deliverance, so you need to vote for change. And going by a lot of developments around the world, we can safely say that a lot of these parties who are emerging from the far rights or the far lefts of the spectrum, they are in it for the long game. They're not looking at, getting a mandate quickly and, undoing everything very quickly. They're in it for the long game. They want to discredit. They want to create mistrust about center democratic parties.
So it's generally advantageous to be an oppositional party. You are not responsible for anything.
Exactly, and that's what the AFD can do well.
Yes, and at the same time remain in the public eye. But I've read a totally different opinion as well, because, again, asking the question whether this is the beginning of a future triumph of this AFD party, or whether the party has reached its ceiling. Again, I have read arguments for both of those positions. The first one, that it's the beginning of the new era you have just described. The second opinion is that they have, kind of reached all the voters they can reach. This is the maximum. They have been partially harmed by heavy-handed support from across the ocean, because this has scandalized conservative German voters who are also anti-American, and no one loves foreign interference that much. So during this next 5 years in parliament,
4 years.
4 years, sorry. You see, I have my Russian, still my Russian analogies. The State Duma used to also have a legislature for 4 years, but that it was prolonged to 5. So during this next 4 years, they're going to just sit there making speeches, and the protest voters, the voters who vote not because they like a party or a candidate, but because they dislike the establishment, they love something new and they get tired quickly. So after sitting those 4 years just dangling their legs in the Bundestag, they're going to tire their present electorate, and then they're in for a decline. This is the second position. Not being a German political scientist or an expert on Germany, I can't actually determine which argument is better founded, but I understand you side more with the first than with the second.
I side more with the first, also because of experience from the Indian context. So for the longest time, the BJP, which is now dominating every part of our political life, and who, by the way, right now seems very harmless and very friendly and amicable, considering that the bar has been set so high by the new White House administration. So that is a conversation that we can have later.
Or rather, the bar has been set so low.
High or low, depending on...
So yeah, now you can appear sane and decent and adult.
Very approachable.
Yeah, I must confess that even the Russian authorities, when compared to the current American administration, sometimes win my sympathies in being the more balanced ones in the room. I never thought I would be saying this, but in all honesty, I must. Yeah.
So I think the BJP for the long time, their argument or the way they spinned the narrative for the electorate was, we've never had the chance to, roll out the policies that we really wanted to, because we were never in the government. And our views were not taken seriously. Our suggestions were not taken seriously because we were in the opposition. So unless and until you actually give us the vote and bring us into office, you can't expect to see much change. And once they came into office, they started delivering on things that were important to their agenda and not necessarily things that they had been promising all along. So, for instance, when you talk about infrastructure or unemployment, not that they publicly keep talking about it. Instead, they go on building temples and building monuments of national unity and peace and whatnot, which is fine, I get it. But sometimes I find myself asking, have we really run out of all kinds of problems that we now have surplus money and energy and the labor to start building statues and monuments of unity? Because I think we have some very real-time issues which need more serious addressing than the others do. But then because you're in control, you have the mechanisms, you can shift the gears as and how it suits you. You can also change the narratives. So getting the media into the whole fold also plays a very important role. So I don't think that it's a very unfounded fear that in the long run things are looking rocky, unless and until Mr. Merz really gets out of his comfort zone and decides to do things that are needed without actually thinking that he may have to pay a political price for it in the next elections.
Well, one doesn't want to prophesy these kinds of things, but a couple more of terrorist attacks like the one we've been seeing before the elections will certainly...
We'll talk about this conspiracy theory because it is very closely connected to Russia.
Really?
Yeah, so to not increase too much of the excitement about this, so when these attacks, so for those people who don't know, just in the run-up to the elections, there were a few attacks in public spaces, not particularly targeted at prominent people, but targeted at normal people, which were committed by people who came into Germany as refugees from countries like Afghanistan, Syria. So you have this strong profile, you kind of have the description. You have a young man. He's coming from a particular region. He is a follower of a particular religion. And then he just goes crazy. And the fact that it kept happening in such close proximity to each other
elections.
and
Actually,
to the
during
elections
the election period,
actually had a lot of people asking themselves if they had been aided and abetted to just go amok in public spaces by Russia. Because...
Why by Russia, for people?
Because
it benefits AfD, right? That's the logic.
That's the logic.
But then the AfD themselves could have done it. It's quite as easy.
Yeah, but the AfD has the problem that they're already on the watch list of the internal intelligence service and of the constitutional court. So there are some wings of the AfD which are actually on the watch list. So, you're kind of flirting with the line, but you're not just stepping over. So again, I said it's conspiracy theory, but it was something that made you take a moment and think that, could there be any sense behind it? Because it's unusual that in a span of 3 or 4 weeks, you have these things happening 3 times. One in Aschaffenburg, one in Munich, and one in Berlin.
They happened before as well.
Yeah, no, but I'm just saying, just so close to the elections.
I noticed that too. It was impossible not to notice. And I did have an idea that whoever could have orchestrated these events, because if you have, for example, a network of followers whom you can ignite or excite into doing whatever, you can time these events within a pretty close
Some people
range.
even went as far as saying that the refugees because they were refugees not from some random parts, but from Syria and Afghanistan, which had a very close relation with Russia for one or the other reason.
So they were Russian agents
Not
initially.
necessarily Russian agents, but Russia had some leverage. To the thing that we've been speaking about, that you promise the families of the young soldiers that you will get so and so much money, which in our eyes is not a lot of money.
Social benefits, yes.
It's not a lot of money in our eyes, but for them, it can be a game changer.
You know what? Now it's a lot of money in anybody's eyes, because these payments in case of Russia have been on the rise during the last 2 years, and now it's a sum that can tempt, a lot of people, I would say.
Yeah.
And they're still increasing, the regions are still increasing the payments, which means that they have their KPIs. So they need to deliver that much content.
So I don't want to create a lot of space for a conspiracy theory and legitimize it, but this was a question that kept coming up.
Of course, and conspiracy theories are fascinating. Especially in times of fast and unpredictable change, people go into all sorts of esoteric knowledge or old and
Or you
new.
start seeing connections between things which actually have nothing to do with each other.
So what is so attractive about a conspiracy theory? Why is it such a thing cropping up now and again? Because a human mind can tolerate chaos. We are so constituted that a frightening explanation is still better than no explanation at all. We are, and here I'm quoting Borges, the Argentinian writer, he wrote in one of his essays that we can better tolerate the idea that the world is run by evil than the idea that the world is run by no one at all. Unpredictability is intolerable to a human mind. And conspiracy theories offer simplistic blanket explanations that, yes, connect the dots that are already there. So they do not just invent things. They make a seemingly logical connection between actual events and provide a reason why these events happen.
But that's why conspiracy theories are also particularly, they work well with right-wing parties, because the modus operandi of a lot of right-wing parties is to take problems, real-time problems, and provide overly simplistic solutions to these very complicated problems.
But
so like if you see the origins of conspiracy theories on what spectrum and what kind of people they speak to, it's not usually the people who have a more balanced worldview. You may have your preferences, but what I'm saying is, so for instance, for me to believe that a particular group of people is out to replace my people, that's really like a very far-fetched assumption. But I'm more gullible to it because I can't make sense of that extreme chaos around me.
But I can't agree that conspiracy theories belong to a certain part of the political
No, I said they
spectrum.
work well. They work well for the right wing.
They work well with any extreme part of the said spectrum. For example, a highly simplified version of a Marxist theory that explain the world history through a fight between the workers and those who exploit them is also a conspiracy theory in its own right.
Yeah.
And here we tread on shaky ground because, again, one person's Marxist theory is another person's conspiracy theory. We call something conspiratorial because it seems to us uneducated and therefore unworthy of attention, like a flat earth theory, which is bonkers, of course. But in another auditorium, we social scientists can theorize and offer our own explanations of why the world runs on the rails that it runs on, and we are not called conspiracy mongers for this. So we really ought to be careful because people who are being dismissed by saying that their worldview is merely some sort of superstition, they harbor a grudge and they tend to come back. We have seen time and again, we have seen it in Russia, and I think we are seeing it in America, how views that were supposed to be marginal and just held by a bunch of weirdos become mainstream.
But even in Germany, the things that you could not imagine saying or which were not acceptable are things that are normalized now. And so I'm not saying it is at the level that it is in the US, like we said at the beginning. I think the US is playing in its own category. But I've lived in Germany for 15 years now. And I can sense it every time I walk into a room, especially in the past 2 years, how the perception changes. And it's not because people have suddenly started thinking about it. The change is that even earlier people always thought, she's from outside, she's not German. But now people have started saying it. And they think it's okay to, kind of rub it in my face that, oh, are you sure you belong here? And I think that's what I meant, that you make the unspeakable acceptable. You kind of legitimize it in a way by giving it a political podest. Like, for instance, what happened with Mr. Vance's speech. in the Munich Security Conference about this war of cultural war, whatever. And he just made it so normal to give the Europeans a dressing down, which is fine. Like, you can give them a dressing down if you need to, but not at that level. And I think he just legitimized the existence of the AfD on that floor by saying, by kind of challenging the Germans that it was kind of, pardon my French, shitty of you to not invite the AfD and the BSW to the security conference.
This didn't seem to help the AfD much in the elections. Again, Americans are too heavy-handed.
Yeah, but I think the popular perception, even amongst people, was, and I've heard this in a few contexts, like, even when you're going on the bus, it doesn't have to be people where people are like, not that they're going to go and vote for the AfD, but they're going to start asking themselves the question that, are we the only ones, who take pride in being this very left liberal kind of a space? Maybe the time calls for it that, we start kind of taking a step back and look out for ourselves first. As Mr. Vance said, that, Europe also needs to do what is good for itself, which is not always being so friendly to the migrants.
A colleague who was at the Munich Security Council Security Conference, yes, later shared his impression that many of the so-called third world representatives there were kind of gleefully listening to that speech. And afterwards, again, they said, this is what American lecturing looks like. Now you Europeans also got a taste of this, because for the last 30 years, they were touring the globe, telling everyone what democracy is, how they should behave, whom they should invite where. But that was usually directed at the developing countries'
Not
audiences, yes. But now it is also directed at the Europe. Well, Schadenfreude is a very German sentiment, so Germans have a special word for it. But I don't think it's a very productive one. We all enjoy our neighbors' vows sometimes, yes. But again, I don't think it leads us anywhere. But there's a difference, I think, between normalization of the marginal and conspiracy theories per se.
That anyway. No, we were just talking about how things that were not a part of the mainstream, which were not, in Germany would call it salonfähig. You don't speak about these things in civilized spaces. And now it's become okay to say those things and speak of those things.
So, and the conclusion from this is that those unspeakable things ought to have been better suppressed previously, or
better verbalized.
Or they ought to have been gradually co-opted into the civilized space.
Absolutely.
You will readily understand that I absolutely side with the second option, because cooptation is one of the basic democratic mechanisms. And coming back for a moment to the AfD, again, I don't know how these Machiavellian tactics are popular or not in the German politicum, but here we have a party that has grown really quickly and which is composed of a more or less random people. It's not a party with an old history, with a long history, with a stable core. So it's just a bunch of guys and girls who wanted to get elected. Nothing seems easier to me as an outsider than to try to, shell off some of these people from their core, to try to co-opt those that are less radically inclined, and generally during these 4 years, to introduce a healthy split into the heart of this new fraction. Perhaps they have swallowed more mandates when they know how to digest. So some of their members can easily be lured to, abscond. What do you think?
I hope it is like that, and I do sincerely hope that it turns out like that at the end of 3.5 years.
Again, we are not advising anyone on anything.
No. We're just speculating.
Yes, but this is part of, parliamentary technique.
Yeah, but at the same time, one also cannot forget that a lot of people, especially in the past 4 years, were extremely frustrated because no amount of stability was in sight. Economically, politically, security-wise. So it was just all over the place. And they expected their politicians to step up. And the politicians, they tried, but it was unfortunately not enough. So I'm not going to say that they did nothing. They tried. They really, really tried. But considering how the world is working right now. There are a lot of factors that you don't have influence on. So it was not enough. Part of it was their own doing, like lack of infrastructural development. The writing was on the wall for a long time. You just didn't do it. But going back to what I was saying, so I don't think a lot of people who voted for the AFD are there because, no one else wanted them in very broad terms. I think it's because they chose to leave their political homes of, voting for. So, for instance, a lot of people who would have voted for the Greens this time, they said that the Greens were not assertive enough. They did not have a clear plan. The left seemed to have a very clear plan. They seemed to have very clear measures, what they wanted to do.
So why such a success of the left? What's your opinion?
Because, like I said,
was it because people were scandalized by the succces of the right and wanted to, put something on the other scale of the balance?
Then they could have also voted for the Greens. Because...
But if you vote for the Greens, you vote for higher energy prices.
That you do, but then, they were also trying to say that, we can have like a Germany investment fund, a Deutschland fund and whatever. My point is that because the mainstream parties failed to address the concerns in a very substantial fashion, so they did address concerns, some here, some there, but not in a substantial fashion. So you don't go out to your voters and you say that, affordable housing. This is what I'm going to give you. These are the 5 steps, and let's work on it. And affordable housing in Berlin, for instance, is a big thing.
Yes, it is.
It's a big thing. So I think it spoke to people. And a lot of people then thought that, Russia here or there, I don't care. As long as I'm able to have an affordable house, I don't care what happens to Ukraine. I don't care about what happens to Russia or to Trump, for all I know. I want to make sure that my family has a roof on its head, and that I am taking care for myself. And I think it's a legit concern. You may or may not like it, but it's a legitimate concern for a family which is struggling to make ends meet. So I think that was where a lot of people who left their political homes, in a way. So people who could have voted for the CDU, some of them thought, if I'm going to vote for the Virgin Light, like the CDU is the lighter version of the Conservative, so then I might as well just vote for the real deal. Why vote for the CDU? Because the AFD seems to have like clear ideas and they are not afraid to say that. Same happened to the Greens. So a lot of people chose voting for the left than for the Greens.
So in your perspective, the Greens are the left are more radical party.
They are more radical in terms of, firstly, they're also super young. So it makes them very relatable. Not all of them, but I think like the face, it was called the Goldilocks, not syndrome, but like a phenomena, because one of the politicians who created a lot of furor through her speech in the Bundestag when the CDU broke this firewall with the AfD.
So how does the Goldilocks come into this picture?
Because she literally like had a very passionate, very fiery speech on the floor of the Bundestag, which was like a moment where you took a step back and you just saw her as a politician, and not like dismissing her thing. She's one of those lefties.
Yeah. Interesting. And by the way, another interesting phenomenon that we see not from actual polling results, because we don't have the breakup of the data, but from exit polls and sociological surveys, is that men and women within the same generation vote differently.
Yeah.
And this is not a specifically German phenomena. No. And it is so interesting. In America, it is also a thing. So in the younger generations, the women are turning more and more to the left, while the men are turning more and more to the right.
And another interesting element to this whole polling thing is the Germans, when asked about their political preferences, were surprisingly very, very transparent and honest, because the pre-poll results...
Germans are generally honest.
No, but the pre-poll results are so close to the actual results, as opposed to a lot of other countries where the pre-polls went completely in a very different direction.
Well, in case of American elections, predictions came more or less.
But like
correctly. So people were no longer concealing that they were going to
in my
Trump.
country, I can say that
In Russia, it's absolutely so. If we had the advantage of having actual voting results, which we don't, but when we still had actual elections, there was always this effect that some party electorate doesn't reveal itself to be supporters of this or that party, and there's the so-called loyalistic slant when people give the socially expected answer to the pollsters and then they vote in some other way. But Germans have no reason to conceal their opinions. This may also mean that the AfD that we're talking so much about is no longer marginalized in the public opinion, so people are not ashamed to say that they will vote for this party.
No, they're not. And going to what you said earlier about the male versus female preference, it also reminds me of Margaret Atwood. You know, the book Handmaid's Tale?
Yes.
So it's also very...
Anti-utopias are all the rage these days. They come
Unfortunately, they come true.
So fast. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah. So I think I was also thinking of that because, you are kind of... Because by voting right, you are affirming a very patriarchal, very power dynamic based order.
But if you're a
societal order, in a way.
If you're a young man, why would you? Well, would you be really dreaming of a patriarchal world order?
Well, you're looking for easy answers, right? Like what you said earlier, the chaos is really confusing for you.
Yes.
And so the most instinctive thing that comes to you is
women should know their place, and then
I don't think it starts with women
personally.
should know their place. It starts more from there should be a clear division of labor because me staying home on paternal leave doesn't make sense.
When Adam plowed and Eve span, who was then the nobleman, as it was the famous Lutheran slogan, I'm not sure how division of labor can be maintained in a post-industrial economy, really.
But that's what I'm saying, that the chaos is too much. And you're trying to look for easy answers. So the easiest answer is the one that you find in your familiar space. So you want to reinforce a very ordered system of life. And that involves having clear roles, clearly defined roles, and not a lot of mix here and there. Like sometimes I cook, sometimes you cook. I'm just like dumbing it down. I'm not that shallow as I make it sound right now. But I'm just saying that for a lot of people, it is something that they wish for.
One of the explanations that I've seen explained is, and that was in the American context, was that the post-industrial economy that I have mentioned favors women more. Young women have higher percentage of college and post-college education than men, and they start earning more, but they still expect their partner to be at least their financial equal, and young men can no longer afford to compete with them. So they feel themselves to be unsatisfied or left out in the cold by this new social economic situation. I don't know how realistic that explanation is, but the phenomena is there. And it's something out of, again, primitively understood feministic textbook about the war of the sexes. But now it seems like there's something in this. Contrary to the classical feminist thought, since the times of Gertrude Stein, who wrote that the tragedy of a feminist movement is that women side with their menfolk. The industrial owner's wife will be with the industry owners, not with the female workers, and the other way around. But now it seems to be that even within the same demographic, men and women look the opposite ways politically.
But it's also different, no? Because like, for instance, in India, I cannot say with a good conscience that younger women would vote more left than the younger men would.
We have data from United States and from Germany, also from the UK. And there, the difference is, again, I can't say that it's a fundamental divide, but I think it's more pronounced than it
Do you think it's a differentiation based on the parameter of perception of democracy delivering for the common man versus democracy not delivering for the common man.
Was it delivering for a common woman?
No, man, woman, whatever. Like,
Person.
I'm saying man because the men are the one who go and vote, right? In the Western context.
Yes, but again, why the women folk, to use the archaic term, don't vote the same way? Aren't they inhabiting the same environment?
No, because I'm saying this because probably the women are not craving for this going back to old way of life, where they had not so many benefits, whereas for the men, and I think it also comes from this power dynamics base, so when you are living in a particular part of the world, you have economic wealth, you're well to do, you have better means, you have better resources, you can afford a lot more things, and now these are the kind of things that are not so easy, neither in the US nor in Europe, and so you want to go back to that, where you can afford more, where you can you can have a good life, and which unfortunately right now is not the reality for a lot of people in Germany. They cannot probably imagine to have the kind of life they were having 20, 30 years ago. Not in terms of how much money they earned, but the things that they could afford for themselves compared to other parts of the world. But in my part of the world, for instance, the perception is that thanks to our current leader, we can do so many things, like it's making us, it's giving us respect on the world stage because we come from this country, we are well educated.
That's the advantage of starting from a lower threshold.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. It's an open question that makes me wonder sometimes. Is it along this west-east axis, or not west-east but global north versus global south, because those are all loaded terms?
That was a very popular concept until recently. Now that there's a sort of united American, Soviet, well, not Soviet, American, Russian
Federation.
Yes, bromance 2.0, as we said. The whole north-south picture is suddenly so confused.
So blurry.
But then again, Russia as a leader of the global south was a weird combination in the first place, because we're not a very southern country to begin with.
And I don't think there was a perception that Russia was global south.
There was a perception on the part of Russia that it was a leader of a global south. I think they were trying...
I think they all claim the same thing. India claims that, China claims that.
Right. But Russia was trying to sort of revive this Soviet composition, where there's the capitalist world led by America, and there's the developing world or the post-colonial world, which is striving to be socialistic, and then in due course to reach the haven of communism, and it is led by the Soviet Union.
But now we are at a very different inflection point, because suddenly the two leaders get along, so it's not the Americans versus the Russians. Sometimes you actually ask yourself, are they actually reading out of a playbook? Like you remember this stream of consciousness conversation that Mr. Trump had about Mr. Zelensky being a dictator and everything that followed.
He's not a very structured public speaker or a blogger.
But I think it's by choice. It makes him approachable.
It's hard to follow his stream of ideas sometimes.
It makes him approachable for a lot of people, because not a lot of people, I don't think most of the people are very structured in their thoughts.
Not all of them have what is called logorrhea. That is an unstoppable urge to talk incessantly. Okay, we ought not to be petty. Whatever attracts public attention works these days, starting with simplistic explanations.
Ending with AI-generated videos.
Yes. AI-generated videos.
Just a tip for the viewers, if you haven't had a look, just go on Google and look for this.
It's like less than a minute, but it will stay with you.
Just Google AI Trump video and Gaza.
Gaza, yes. This is the kind of Gaza you've never seen, and perhaps you will want to unsee it once you saw it, but we cannot help you there. You've been warned. With this, we will conclude this very, I would say, variegated
So there was how do you say, we did not provide you with news, but we provided you with insights on those news.
We have not provided you with explanations, but we have provided you with the idea of a futility of any explanation, at least the one that covers everything. So we try to, agitate against blanket ideas and simplistic theories.
But as a homework for people who are watching this, because we spoke about this earlier, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the most bizarre yet relatable conspiracy theory you came across.
So
in the comments.
What's your guilty pleasure in this particular sphere?
Yeah.
And then one last question. I think we mentioned Soros, the omnipotent and the omnipresent
one of the earlier
figure as perceived by Indian parliamentarians in one of our previous episodes. So what are the favorite Indian conspiracy theories? Because the Russians love the Anglo-Saxons, the invidious and evil Anglo-Saxons who are behind everything from the downfall of the Russian Empire to the downfall of the Soviet Union. So they are not English, nor are they Americans, they are the Anglo-Saxons. And they're generally composed of equal parts of Rockefellers and Rothschilds. So this is our pet national conspiracy theory.
Brought up by Soros.
Soros also belongs to this picture, but he came in relatively late in the day. Before him, there were invidious Anglo-Saxons as well. So what's yours? Is it international jury?
No, I think it's for us the grand replacement theory about populations being replaced by populations. And in our case,
who is doing that? Who is orchestrating? Who is the puppet master?
So it's the Muslim community in general. Which is, I think we spoke about this in the episode we did on demography.
Yes.
And that it's a very slippery slope.
The weaponization of demography.
Yeah. So, and it's so bizarre that a lot of things, when people can't make sense of why things are happening or, like this whole uncertainty, you suddenly give that entire phenomena an addendum of jihad. And then suddenly it kind of gains traction, or suddenly it makes sense for some people. And we have had our own share of like a variety of jihads, ranging from love jihad to now quite recently
jihad,
voting.
The one that you explained.
Yeah, then there was a brief moment of something called as Corona jihad. So it's very bizarre.
So everything is jihad with you.
So it's this basic belief that the Muslims are out to get us.
Mm-hmm. But do they have an underground leader or headquarters that is, organizing this whole thing? So it's just them as a group.
Yeah.
Them as people.
Yeah. Because you don't consider them as individuals. It's always a group of people. It's a population.
Well, that sounds ominous enough.
Sitting in Berlin.
Even sitting in Berlin.
Yeah.
It sounds
or specifically sitting
enough.
in Berlin.
Oh, yes. There were a couple of conspiracy theories that took traction there, and then things turned very ugly very fast. So, again, on that cheery note, we say goodbye to our grateful and patient audience.
And look forward to hearing from you in the comments.
On your favorite conspiracies. And we also look forward to meeting you again in
a few days.
In a couple of weeks. We'll
figure it out.
With a new episode of Unboxing Russia and India.
Thank you.
Thank you.